In the overall story of Red Dead Redemption 1 and 2, one major event is arguably a massive catalyst and a pivotal moment for the events of both games. This is however an event that we do not get to see in either games, as it happens right before the beginning of Red Dead Redemption 2, the prequel to Red Dead Redemption. Of course, I'm talking about the infamous Blackwater Massacre. A brutal, bloody gunfight involving the Blackwater Police Department, the Pinkerton Detective Agency, and supposedly the famous Landon Ricketts himself against the Van der Linde gang, which happened in May of the year 1899. The events saw the deaths of many people, including Van der Linde gang member Matt Callender and the ruthless, cold-blooded murder of Heidi McCourt by the hand of Dutch Van der Linde, who shot her in the head, whose name we only learn in Red Dead Redemption courtesy of mysterious forces. So what really happened in the Blackwater Massacre? How did it play out? Both games do a fantastic job of keeping it relatively ambiguous and up to interpretation, with contradicting accounts. So let's piece together the Blackwater Massacre. Before we can hope to understand what happened, we need to know about where it happened. Blackwater is a thriving port on Flatiron Lake. It was a small settlement, but quickly developed into a more modernised location. When it comes to money, this place likely has it, drawing the attention of workers, people aspiring to be something, and, of course, outlaws. Which leads us to understand why the Van der Linde gang was present in Blackwater in 1899. Sitting right on top of Flatiron Lake, Blackwater is truly in a great position to do trade with settlements such as Saint Denis, meaning if any outlaws that were bold enough tried, there would be a really good take if they succeeded. I'm sure that gives you a rough idea of what we're dealing with when it comes to the settlement of Blackwater. Now, when it comes to understanding how the massacre went down, we have one amazing source that we cannot refuse to utilise. That is, of course, the Journal of Arthur Morgan. It doesn't fill in all the blanks, but it gives us a much better idea than any other source will. So if you did not know, there's an entire Blackwater chapter right at the start of Arthur Morgan's journal, which sheds a lot of light on what might have happened, so let's get cracking. I bought this new journal after the last one got destroyed in that fire all those months ago, whenever it was. Haven't written or drawn much in the past few months, but I was missing it more than I thought I would, and finally near a store, so here I am, I guess. After all that business up north and the fire, we spent a few months in the wilderness travelling down from the northern grizzlies. Stuck mostly in the western foothills of the mountains during the worst of winter, food was easy to find and life was good. Dutch had a lead for some land we were going to buy, but the land did not match up with his criteria. Or he got spooked we were being watched by the law or somebody that knew who we was. And we never bought it, and we are wandering still. We've picked up a couple of new folk in the Grizzlies. Jenny, a sweet young girl we met abandoned on the roadside. And Micah, an outlaw Dutch met in a bar someplace. Dutch seems very taken with Micah, who is pretty hot-headed, argumentative, and full of himself. Hosea and I are less sure. Guess we shall see. Eventually we came out of the wilderness and are now holed up outside of Blackwater, although sometimes I stay in town hunting for opportunities. I might be onto something. We got plenty of money and the trail we took was so torturous and slow nobody could have followed us south and east or figured out where we was heading. We was thinking about California, but then Dutch and Hosea brought us down to Blackwater. Blackwater has apparently grown a lot since any of them were last here. I was told to expect little more than a trading post, but the place is growing fast, and it's almost a small city. The town seems to be riddled with corruption, but there's certainly plenty of money here. It's good to be sleeping in a bed from time to time and living a more civilized life after so long under a canvas. But I do not particularly like being this near to a town. We are living here, camping outside town mostly, hidden in plain sight I guess. Life seems pretty easy. Abigail and Marston keep arguing. I wonder why exactly he came back. He cannot seem to decide if he wants to be a father to that boy of his or not. The arguing is exhausting. I heard talk of a man sounded like Trelawney, but we haven't seen him in many months. Hosea and I are onto something pretty big. Might be a lot of cash coming in to do with a real estate scam Hosea thinks he may have discovered. I'm not sure yet. The perfect crime, we think. One where we rob crooks. We are being real careful. It's fun working with Hosea again. The man is an artist of nonsense. Even if nothing comes of it, we are having an amusing enough time. It's good to be running scams again. Hosea is a born huckster. He is getting anxious, worried that by lingering in town we are going to bring undue attention to ourselves. But Dutch thinks he is also onto something big. His words, not mine. Bank money being brought in by boat apparently. So for now, we are working on both things and seeing what happens. Plan is to flee west into the desert country someplace if we can. Micah and Dutch are planning to rob the ferry in town. They think it's laden with riches, cash coming in for the banks coming in by boat. For once, I am not getting involved in this job. Hosea and I are too taken up with our own business, which I believe could go very well. And Dutch seems confident that with the group assembled, all will be okay. Important side note here is Arthur Morgan was not directly involved with the ferry job. He and Hosea Matthews were following up on another lead. Plan is for them to carry out the job, then flee into the wilderness out to the west. The next day, Hosea and I will carry out our scam and join them. Dutch seems happy and excited. He's talking again about California, but he's also talking about a lot of other places. The next entry is from after the plan fails. We have been running for weeks. I mean, running more than usual. The job they was pulling in Blackwater, robbing that ferry, it turned into a disaster. Young Jenny got killed, poor thing, while Sean and Mac both got arrested or killed, nobody seems sure which. Dutch shot a girl. I'm not too sure if by accident or design, and seems like it might have been a setup. We took to the hills in an almighty scramble, leaving money and most of our things behind. Then, as we were fleeing east over the Grizzlies, an almighty storm hit us. Davy Callender, who had got shot in the gut on the raid, passed away. It was brutal to watch, and the rest of us nearly froze, but we found shelter and have been resting here in some old abandoned mining town while we await the thaw. So that's Arthur Morgan's account on what went wrong in Blackwater. Obviously, he didn't write too much about the massacre itself because he probably doesn't know the details. Now, what's really fascinating here is that Arthur mentions it seems like it could have been a setup. And as stated by Javier in Chapter 1, the ferry heist went according to plan until they got the money, at which point Pinkertons appeared everywhere, suggesting in my mind at least that the ferry was a trap. Staged for the infamous Van der Linde gang, who already had a decent reputation by this point, hence why Dutch caught wind of it and why it seemed so irresistible. Of course, this trap transformed into a massive firefight through the streets of Blackwater as the Van der Linde gang desperately attempted to escape. And though they took a few casualties, the Van der Linde gang managed just that. It's also very interesting that Micah was the one that encouraged Dutch to rob the ferry, especially considering that during Chapter 6, Micah was discovered to be a rat picked up by the Pinkertons after those who escaped St. Denis bank robbery, barring Charles Smith and Abigail, returned from Guarma. Maybe Micah was more involved with the Pinkertons than even the Pinkertons wanted to admit. What's interesting and perhaps one of the most controversial parts about the Blackwater Massacre is the death of Heidi McCourt, the young mother that Dutch murdered in cold blood on the ferry. John Marston later states that Micah urged Dutch to kill her. Though why Dutch, a character who at this point had strong morals, supposedly decided to do this is still ultimately unknown. When asked by Arthur Morgan later about what really happened on that boat, including why Dutch killed this random girl, Dutch simply deflects the question.
I ain't had time to ask. What really went down back there on that boat? We missed you. That's what happened. Come on.
This suggests there was no real justification for it and Dutch just did it because he could, even if he himself never understood why. In the aftermath of the massacre, the town of Blackwater went into a state of lockdown, with Pinkertons patrolling all over the town itself and the nearby Great Plains, which remained in place for months after the infamous event. The Van der Linde gang was forced to flee north up into the mountains as opposed to their initially intended west, winding up taking refuge in an abandoned town in the mountains known as Coulter, being afforded some time to rest and recover courtesy of a storm which swept in during their ascent, making being followed up into the mountains a much tougher task that would take longer for the authorities, Pinkertons or bounty hunters, which is where the events of Red Dead Redemption 2 begin. As I mentioned, the Van der Linde gang did not escape Blackwater unscathed. Jenny Kirk was shot and killed, Davy Callender was shot in the gut which resulted in his death at Coulter, Mac Callender was shot and unable to leave with the gang. He was found shortly after by Agent Andrew Milton of the Pinkerton Detective Agency, who after briefly questioning Mac to no avail, killed him in what he later describes to Arthur Morgan as more of a mercy killing, potentially meaning that the extent of Mac's injuries likely would have resulted in his slow and painful demise anyway. John Marston was shot in the arm during the firefight, though it was merely a flesh wound. Due to being in a capable state, John was sent up into the mountains with Micah to scout ahead, though I'd argue that his arm injury likely hindered him a little bit, which resulted in wolves getting the better of him, giving him his iconic scars. Sean Maguire was captured unharmed by Ike Skelding's bounty hunter posse shortly after the massacre. He was tortured yet gave up no information
information on his fellow gang members and was later rescued by Josiah Trelawney, Javier Escuela, Charles Smith, and Arthur Morgan. The incident, according to some accounts in Red Dead Redemption 1, claimed the lives of 37 involved in the incident, including 22 outlaws and 15 lawmen, though this number is highly debatable as considering what's mentioned by the Van der Linde gang members, they certainly didn't lose 22 members. And Arthur makes no mention of any other gangs present in his journal, furthering the mystery shrouding the massacre as no official statement is ever made about specifics. We've spoken about the innocent woman named Heidi McCourt who was shot in the head by Dutch Van der Linde on the ferry, and of course a massacre to this scale would have resulted in the injuries of many people, potentially including Agent Archer Fordham's mother, according to a cut piece of dialogue found in the game files for Red Dead Redemption, which suggests she was shot during the incident and died the following year. Whether that's related to her wounds or not, I guess isn't relevant. The incident remained fresh in the minds of the local population, with a bartender in 1907 mentioning that Blackwater would likely never fully recover. Before we continue, I just want to say that I know this looks like a sad shot of a guy mourning the death of somebody he loved over a grave. I checked the grave, it's an 8-year-old child who died nearly 100 years before the game Red Dead Redemption 2 is set, so why does this bloke go and cry at random graves? I don't understand. When it comes to survivors of note, there are a few worth mentioning. Though only well over a decade after the massacre, Landon Ricketts gained status as one of the survivors, with the massacre apparently being part of the reason for Ricketts' relocation to Chuparosa, Mexico. Though it's also notable that John Marston and Landon Ricketts do not meet until 1911, and Ricketts' reputation would lead you to believe that he'd have taken to the heart of the action where John Marston would have been. And considering John got shot, could this have been a shot from Landon Ricketts himself, unbeknownst to the both of them when they met 12 years later in Mexico? That being said, the Van der Linde gang do don face masks when they carry out robberies and illegal actions, and considering how when the Pinkertons find Dutch's camp in Chapter 2, they do not seem to recognise John, it makes me think that John's not on their radar.
We got a problem.
Not a problem. Visitors. A solution. Good day, fine people. Mr. Van der Linde. Mr. Matthews, I presume. And who are you?
Rip Van Winkle.
Huh.
Meaning that Blackwater John was little more than a gun and a mask to the authorities and they didn't know who he was, and I'm pretty sure he remembers getting shot far more vividly than he does anyone shooting at him. So John and Landon Ricketts not recognising each other from the Blackwater Massacre literally means nothing. Was Landon Ricketts really there, or was it just a legend to bolster his reputation as a ferocious, unkillable lawman? His involvement in the massacre is never made clear, leaving it heavily debatable as to whether or not he was actually there at all. This doubt is considered by his fame and the fact that nothing is mentioned in Red Dead Redemption 2, though as stated before, his involvement only became a topic of conversation well over a decade afterwards. By 1899, Landon Ricketts is already famous and has a cigarette card, leading me to believe that his involvement in such an infamous incident going amiss for 12 years is just a further suggestion that it's just a legend and he was never there at all. Certain dialogues with Willie Oates in Red Dead Redemption would also suggest that he too could have been a survivor of the massacre, though nothing is confirmed. As he says, "I am never going back to Blackwater, especially after what happened in 1899. It's a very loose statement that could mean anything, but in a game where everything's done by design, what it means is a lot more specific." Jimmy Brooks identifies Arthur from Blackwater while in Valentine, not long after, meaning he was also likely there around the time of the massacre, though considering his entanglement with the strange man, there's a lot of mystery surrounding this seeming idiot who appears out of nowhere. Wild theories may go as far as to say that Jimmy Brooks never existed and was a manifestation created by the strange man to test Arthur's true morality, but if that's not the case and Jimmy Brooks is real, which is the more likely scenario here, let's be honest, he almost certainly was in the area around the time of the incident. Obviously, most Van der Linde gang members survived. Agent Andrew Milton was probably nearby during the massacre, being present in the immediate aftermath, though no involvement before that is confirmed, though considering it would appear as if the ferry was part of a trap laid by the Pinkertons, I'd argue that he more than likely was present during the massacre. Considering he essentially is the one in charge of hunting down the Van der Linde gang, I wouldn't be surprised if the trap on the ferry was his idea. But that's just a theory backed up by meagre evidence at best. And as I mentioned, possibly Archer Fordham's mother, who according to cut dialogue was shot, and according to her grave, which you can find in Blackwater and Red Dead Redemption, she died a year later. It's important to remember that the Blackwater Massacre is a pivotal moment for all major characters in Red Dead Redemption 2. It's the beginning of the end for the Van der Linde gang, leading to the disbandment of the gang by the end of 1899. The Pinkertons gave chase all the way through the story, pushing the gang to collapse, all because of what happened in Blackwater. The massacre's effect on the gang's disbandment in 1899 makes it by extension responsible for the events of Red Dead Redemption, and therefore making the Blackwater Massacre one of the most important moments in the stories of both games combined. And so even though we never get to see this moment, it is massively impactful on everything that's going on, and follows all of the major characters all the way to the end of their stories. And what makes this legendary moment so effective is the fact that we do not see it. And though it would be cool to see what happens second for second, the ambiguity and controversy regarding the event and its effect on the characters who see it in the same light is arguably integral to the method of storytelling presented in Red Dead Redemption 2. As without that ambiguity, certain moments in the story would not be as effective as they are, because that atmosphere heavily moulds the narrative. But the question what really happened at Blackwater is perhaps one of the biggest mysteries of the Red Dead universe, and I think that how characters describe what happened as seemingly a trap, and the fact that it seems to mark a run of bad luck that stays with the gang all the way to its disbandment by the end of that year, and a line from Arthur Morgan in Chapter 6 saying, "I can't help but feel like to somebody this is all going according to plan." This is all evidence that somebody in the Van der Linde gang has betrayed them from the very beginning, at least as far as the events of the game are concerned. And that person is Jack Marston, you little shit. I'm joking. It was obviously Gavin. But seriously, you know exactly who I'm implicating. Pearson. Alright, I guess I'll spell it out for you. Micah Bell. Was he a rat from the start? Not just from after he got picked up after getting back from Guarma, as his actions and ideas are always derailing the gang's plans and drawing attention to them that they could have easily avoided. Let me know what you think on that one. But I guess that concludes today's video, trying to piece together what exactly happened in the Blackwater Massacre. And though we may never have proper answers, at least now we can all walk away with a good idea of what sort of went down, and why it had such a profound effect on the Van der Linde gang. Anyways, thank you all for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to go ahead, leave a like, subscribe, share the channel with your friends and all that wonderful stuff. I'd really appreciate it. If you wish to support the channel further, maybe consider becoming a patron. That's completely up to you whether you think it's worth it or not, but there's some cool stuff over there as well that will make it worth your while. There will be a link in the description, and I will see you all very soon with another video at some point.